Okay, welcome to the second Zoom program for Cleveland Decorative Arts. I'm Dr. Ware Petznick, and today we're going to be looking at North Union made shaker furniture. Cleveland Decorative Arts celebrates the rich diversity of decorative art that's made, collected, and appreciated in Cleveland, Ohio. We have a webpage, clevelanddecorativearts.org, and we also have a group Facebook page of the same name. We're a member-based organization, nonprofit, so if you wish to join us in future programs, please do consult us on either of those two ways to communicate. Today's lecture is based largely upon work that I did for an exhibit in 2016 when I worked for the Shaker Historical Society. The exhibit was Shaker Makers, American Furniture Icons from North Union. And there is a video based on that exhibit, and the link is shown there for those of you watching us later. So today we're going to look at North Union furniture, Shaker furniture, how the religion impact what they made and how they made it. We also will learn about the community here in Cleveland by looking at their furniture. At its height in the 1840s, maybe early 1850s, there were about 200 Shakers living across the three separate families, the Mill family, the Center family, and the East family. And across these communities, 200 people who needed beds, chairs, cupboards, all sorts of types of furniture to live their lives and do their work. So there's a lot of furniture that was produced for the use of Shakers living here in that period. The bulk of their production remains undiscovered, but the collection documented at the Shaker Historical Society is by far the largest anywhere. So that's a good place to start to look at North Union made furniture. So today we're going to look at some of the definitions of the terms of our title. We'll look at sources, materials, examples, what's missing, and North Union furniture today and perhaps into the future. Throughout there are dividing slides like this one, which show, maybe I'll back that up a moment, which show the Shaker Historical Society in its infancy. It was founded in 1947, so they didn't have a permanent premises yet. So their collections were displayed in the Moreland School, a public school in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is now the Shaker Heights Public Library. So this is one of their displays showing some of the North Union furniture that they had collected by that point. So who were the Shakers? Illustrated here are Curtis Kramer and Eldris Clemina Minor. Unusually for the time in the 19th century, they had both equal roles for men and women. They believed in equality of the sexes, so there was an elder as well as an eldress assigned to every Shaker community, and that was no different at North Union. The Shakers were a Protestant religion, a sect that branched off from the Quakers, and the community here was called North Union, also known as the Valley of God's Pleasure. So the North Union Shakers, who were they? Where are they from? Well, the initial founders were Ralph and Laura Russell, who was Jacob Russell's son. So it was Jacob Russell's land along present-day Lee Road in Shaker Heights and Cleveland Heights, Ohio, where the North Union Shakers first began to organize and to meet, originally in log cabins. And they were predominantly coming from Connecticut, settling in the Western Reserve here, and they were of English, Scottish, as well as Isle of Man origin, and later on German Americans came as well. So that is kind of the origin makeup of the Shakers who settled at North Union. So, like so many others venturing into the frontier that was the Midwest in America, North Union was forged on the Western Reserve in Warrensville Township, which was Town 7, Range 11, if I remember correctly. The Shakers here practiced their faith following the teachings of Mother Ann Lee. So they amassed, over 1,366 acres, something like that, in the township. And the right shows several photographs of the various buildings attached to their community. North Union Made. So what is North Union? It's the name of the community. Shakers, they were followers of Mother Ann Lee, who came here from England in 1774 and established her religion and started to get followers when she arrived in New York. The name of that church was the United Society of True Believers in Christ's Second Appearing, which is quite a mouthful. So when visitors witnessing their singing and their dancing, which in timber frame buildings, the wooden floor would move, and thus they were nicknamed the Shaking Quakers. And ultimately that became the Shakers, which they adopted eventually. But in some of the resources, you'll see them referred to as the United Society. So that might explain why that appears. North Union furniture, North Union made Shaker furniture, is made for or made by the North Union community. So sources. This image, as well as the other kind of dividing slides, are photographs of the Shaker Historical Society in its infancy, when it had exhibits in Moreland School and as well sometimes in Lomond, private or public elementary schools here in Shaker Heights, Ohio. I think most of them are Moreland School though, which is now the Shaker Heights Public Library. Union made. So what are the sources, academic sources to look up? What are the authorities if you're interested in this topic? Well, Timothy Riemann and Jean Burks, they are very much the authorities. They have published many books on the subject, but even they don't usually say too much about North Union. It's usually not specified. If North Union articles of furniture are illustrated, they tend to be lumped together with, the Western communities, or just in the context of Ohio. So there's a lot to be said about the North Union furniture that isn't published elsewhere. And perhaps to amend some current thinking about what North Union furniture was like and about. For example, they state that North Union didn't use pine. Well, I will be showing you some examples of pine carcasses and secondary woods that are documented to North Union. They also said that North Union didn't make built-ins, didn't do built-in cupboards built into the wall. I believe I will be showing you a walnut built-in cupboard. And the third main thing that kind of struck me in reading some of these other sources was that the design was strongly guided by Union Village in Lebanon, Ohio. I didn't necessarily find that so. Union Village certainly was the more immediate leader, the more senior community. It was to Union Village that Ralph Russell went to learn about the religion. And so Union Village was a larger community that North Union looked up to, but in terms of their furniture, I haven't really seen a direct correlation from the designs that I've seen from Union Village having any direct relationship with the designs that have been documented to North Union. So we need to create new sources. And there is a new source, Imagining the Shakers, which looks like a very interesting book by Robert Emlin. It was only published in 2019, so I haven't actually gotten to see that yet, but hopefully he found some great resources to illustrate North Union furniture there. Period sources. So when you think of sources, what did the Shakers themselves use to help guide their furniture construction and making? They themselves corresponded a lot with each other. They also kept really good records and published a Shaker manifesto. So basically their Shaker internal mail newsletter. They shared poetry, they shared songs, they shared recipes, how to take care of a troublesome sheep, or dairy cattle, dairy cows. They really communicated a lot of significant things in the manifesto. So that could have been a source for them. But for us learning about the Shakers, one of the best period resources, or almost period resources, that we have is in the Shaker Historical Society's collection. It's the album put together by Louis Bouse. And Louis Bouse put this album together in 1931 about the Shakers and the Mormons up in Kirtland, northeast of here. But some of those photos, like the one in the bottom on the screen, it's dated 1876. And I believe that the gentleman in profile there, which appears to be gray hair, pretty sure that is the last elder of North Union, James Prescott, who also wrote the document above called The History of North Union, which was written expressly for the Western Historical Society in 1880. So for furniture, though, if we're looking at, well, what can we learn about the furniture for North Union, there aren't a lot of pre-published resources for us to look to. So ultimately, the furniture itself, the collection at the Shaker Historical Society, is really the largest and best resource for us. So today we'll get a good look at what is in that collection. What did they look to make their furniture? They had the manifesto. A lot of it is country Sheraton. That was a predominant design style based on Thomas Sheraton's publications in England that rural communities kind of continued to make up to about maybe 1840, at the same time as high style furniture like early Victorian or Regency federal kind of styles were being produced by other people simultaneously. So it's a really interesting contrast, the comparative simplicity of North Union furniture, which was guided by their religion, versus contemporary style furniture, which is usually much more elaborate and with more elaborate imported timbers as opposed to materials that were on hand locally. And they also made common chairs. Your typical ladder back chair in 18th century inventories in the eastern colonies of America typically meant either a Windsor chair or a ladder back chair. So the ladder back chair, that supreme symbol of Shaker furniture, isn't a Shaker invention, but it's something that ultimately Mount Lebanon, the capital of the Shaker communities in America, Mount Lebanon tended to refine it to an art form and produce chairs from 0 for your smallest child to 6, 7, 8. They were numbered and produced in exactly the same method and fashion of very, very simple chairs. North Union could have looked to Union Village they probably ventured there more often than other communities, but things like the work table in front, I see no similarity to the work tables and things that were in North Union. North Union furniture was inspired also in part as an extension of their religion, as an extension of their following of Mother Ann Lee, who said, among many things, hands to work, hearts to God, that it was a call to labor, that labor is pleasing to God. So they were prolific, but I think that the furniture and the things that they made were more for their own consumption than it was for any kind of production line or anything like that. The only chair manufacturing business was at Mount Lebanon. So any manufacturing of furniture that seems to have happened at North Union actually seems to only have been to immediate neighbors. Found no advertisements in local papers or anything like that for any other North Union furniture. So it predominantly was made for themselves. Mother Ann Lee also said something to the effect of, work as if you had 1,000 years to live, but you might die tomorrow. So Benjamin Franklin said something similar, and he was a Quaker, so it's coming from the same sources, but Mother Ann Lee repeated it, and the Shakers followed that concept. They built things quickly. They were very efficient. A lot of their innovations were driven by a desire to not waste time. But at the same time, they didn't build flimsy items. They were very careful with their dovetails. And in fact, there is a table, an extraordinary table, that has dovetails not just in the front of a drawer, but also the back of the drawer, which was very unusual for the period. So they built things to last. And finally on the screen, Mother Ann Lee said, there's no dirt in heaven. And they wanted to create a heaven on earth by their actions and their beliefs. So their furniture reflects that. Peg rails, what are they for? Peg rails were so people could hang things and get them off the floor so you can clean the floor properly. If you had a Roomba, the worst, you can't really have a Roomba if you've got a cluttered space, because the little machine just can't get around. It's hitting chair legs, it's hitting other obstacles. But you could use a Roomba very effectively in a shaker environment, because you could easily move all your furniture aside or move it up to a chair rail or a peg rail, and then it can move freely. In the Shaker's time, obviously they didn't have the technology of a robotic vacuum cleaner, but by having the peg rails, by putting their furniture on casters, as well as having low back dining chairs, all of those things meant that they could easily clean the floor, as well as table services easily without getting other things dirty. On the right, there is a low back dining chair that they used at North Union, and that contributes to the cleanliness because it was low enough that the chair could be pushed under the tabletop. So if you're cleaning the tabletop, you don't get dirt and things onto the chair seat in the process. And it also just made things a little easier in keeping things clean. On the right happens to be a typical ladder back chair, which you would think they would have used in their dining rooms, but that wasn't one of the main types. The low back, or at Enfield, for example, they have a dining chair that had a more prominent top rail, so almost like a tablet back. But this was one of the main types that North Union used. So North Union materials, what did they have at hand? What was in their toolbox to create these items? Well, since the Shakers had the technology to have a sawmill, in part thanks to Sister Tabitha in, I think she was in the Harvard, Massachusetts Shaker community, she invented the circular saw. So their sawmill was very efficient, and they produce boards and timber of all sorts, including pine, because they had a stake in a pine forest in Michigan that they'd go up to Michigan, harvest the pine, and then process it in their sawmill, which was quite famous in the region. They also had local timber in the form of ash, beech, birch, chestnut, elm, hemlock, maple, mulberry, oak, pine, poplar, and walnut. And of those, walnut and maple seem to be the dominant timbers that they used most often, with pine often as a secondary wood, as you see in this chest of drawer side rail. They also seem to have created numerous recipes for varnishes for their furniture. Varnishes seal and protect wood if they have a coating on them. So that's one of the reasons why furniture would have been varnished in the first place. But most furniture documented to North Union has evidence of paint, even if it was refinished in the 20th century. So on the left is a stack of painted shaker boxes. So those are some of the colors that would have been used in the paint recipes that they had at the time. And top right, forgive me for the quality of this image, but it's the underside of a fantastic work table, which was refinished in the top, so it looks like a blonde piece of furniture. But the underside, you know, they just didn't bother to strip that side. So there are layers and layers of paint. And this lowest layer is a light blue, which is like the same color light blue that was found on the peg rail from the meeting house. And a similar kind of blue seems to have been applied to the image below, which is the top of a walnut built-in cupboard, which I will show you later. So when people think of shaker furniture, they probably think, oh, the beautiful bare wood, and isn't it gorgeous to have a maple top with a walnut base, and the contrast of the wood are aesthetically pleasing. Well, that aesthetic is kind of flawed, because in the period they pretty much painted most of their furniture, and they even had millennial laws dictating, for example, that in 1845 beds should be painted green, and buildings and architecture were always to be painted white. So they lived in a colorful world, and if you used different timbers in the production of a piece of furniture, painting it a single color unifies it and simplifies it. It also brightens the world with a lot of color, which on a cold, snowy day in Cleveland right now, having a brightly colored red cloak is understandable, as is having perhaps a cheerfully painted article of furniture. And a local conservation studio, ICA, we took to them several pieces of furniture that was believed to be North Union, or documented or attributed to North Union, to see if the paint layers were 19th century, if they were later, you know, what kind of time period they were. And all of them seem to have been original paint colors on the lowest layer. And the trouble is that a lot of the furniture of the produced by the Shakers were refinished by later owners. So you have to look in the cracks and the corners and insides and undersides, and very often in North Union furniture, paint will still be evident if you look for it. What about the seats? Well, they believed in equality, the Shakers, in gender, and so even so, they believed in equality. They still had gender-specific roles. So the brothers were responsible for constructing the frames of the chairs, but the sisters were usually responsible for weaving the seats. And typically you think of Shaker chairs with a lot of reproductions produced by Sturbridge Yankee Workshops or Cohasset Colonials, for example. They usually will have a fabric tape seat. That doesn't seem to be used often in the North Union chair production. Cane in several different distinctive patterns appears often, probably the most often. Splint seats, basically a shaving of wood that is bent to be woven and is generally maybe an inch thick or an inch wide, much wider than a piece of cane. Tape, you know, there may be some examples for North Union. There's one or two chairs in the Shaker Historical Society collection that have a tape seat, but it seems to be an infrequent use. Rush, there are a couple examples of that as well. And there's one notable one that has a fabric seat, and that is a chair that's painted brown. That's the identical partner to the chair on the top right, which came to the collection from a descendant of the Harrison and Tier families. And William Harrison's property was immediately to the east of the Shaker community. So by virtue of identifying the Harrison Tier donation, we were able to, you know, and through the course of doing the Shaker Makers exhibit in 2016, it became evident these two chairs were exactly the same. So they were put together so you can see that, you know, they're the same chair, but they came to the museum at different time periods. North Union examples. Okay, well, we just saw two chairs. In here, more specifically, is a dining chair, usually with ash double stretchers with a single stretcher at the back. This has a cane seat and rounded finials and knees, or just a very, very plain, simple chair, which probably dates from 1840s, give or take. And here again, sorry for the screenshot illustration of the walnut built in, but you know, I encourage you to go to the Historical Society if you want to see these things. But this particular cupboard has a single door at the top and a single drawer at the bottom, and it's also fitted with a lock. And the lock, you know, you wonder, why does that exist when the Shakers had no personal property and they were a communal society? So they shared everything that they possessed when they joined the community. So why would you need to lock anything? Well, it could have contained Shaker tinctures and other herbal medicines that potentially could have been toxic to children, perhaps. And then you might ask the question, well, why would there be children if the Shakers were a celibate order? How does that work? Well, the Shakers were the first organized adoption agency, if you will, of orphan children in this country. They formally adopted orphans, like Emily Jefferson, the African-American sister, who lived with the Mill family until she died when she was only 13. Sorry, lost train of thought. At any rate, they did look after children. Oh, and also children came to the community if a couple were married initially and brought their whole family and then were forced to divide as brothers and sisters across the hall. So there were children who were involved at North Union, though they were not begotten from a union within North Union. Okay, Moving on. Here is one of the original paint finishes, according to Andrea Chevalier at ICA. It came from the meeting house, and it was one of those original peg rails. So the meeting house was the last version of the meeting house that was on Lee Road that you see in the Bouse photos. That one was built in 1848 and consecrated in 1849. So that particular peg rail is very likely to date from that period also, because it was made for that building. Oh, and here's another, sorry, I repeated the slide, another image of it. Chest of drawers. Here is a chest of drawers that was donated by former Shakers or came down in their family. And it seems to be walnut, possibly chestnut that we're looking at there, but it has a beautiful, quite thick, rounded edges, maple top to it. It was refinished at some point, but if you see in the photograph in the bottom there, the carcass is clearly pine. So that is one of the examples and evidence that North Union furniture was indeed made with pine. And here, again, I apologize for the poor quality of the photo and that you can't see the legs. The legs are very prominently turned. They're turned legs with decoration. And this chair, if you looked at it, you probably would not associate it with the Shakers at all. It doesn't look like your typical Shaker chair. But that's just the thing about North Union chairs. None of them are typical. There are a couple of design features that remain consistent, that being ash stretchers. But other than that, there's a lot of variety in North Union chairs and chair making. And this one was made for the Gristmill. It was made for a miller to work. And this was donated to the museum by a descendant of Mr. Dyke, who was a miller at the Gristmill, which was very famously blown up by Charles Reader. Sorry, that's a typo. On July 5th, 1886, which was a Monday. Because they didn't do such things on July 4th, they did it the day after. But it was built to be sturdy. And the image on the right is the Gristmill, an uncustomary view. If it was usually shown from the valley, from the gorge of Doan Brook, and that was like 5 stories high from that level, but from this level, it's only kind of 2.5, but it was a very significant building. And was influential in Shaker Heights, at least, because the Shaker High School yearbook is called the Gristmill, in honor of the Shakers' big building. So here's another North Union made corner cupboard, which was donated by John Hecker, whose family had property along Fairmont Boulevard. So his family historically were neighbors from the period when the Shakers were still living here. And obviously the scale of it looks like they don't match up, but they do. The left side does go on top of the right. Very, very simple. The left, simple paneled construction door, the same kind of door that you see in most kitchens all across America, as well as in Europe now. Their Shaker doors are quite famous. It's an iconic type of cabinet door that the Shakers made popular. So here, North Union, remember, was on the frontier. It was far from any kind of authority, distance-wise. And although they communicated well, they were pretty much, they seemed to do their own thing when it came to furniture production. So here are 8 documented chair finials, chair or rocker finials, that were all identified as being produced at North Union. So A is the miller's chair, B, an apple core and core finial. C, kind of an acorn-like finial. D, elliptical, a globe, just a rounded end. So that's kind of almost like no finial. So all of that above are in the Shaker Historical Society collection. And then the bottom left is kind of a apple and core finial on a rocker in the Western Reserve Historical Society. And on the right is in a private collection, a chair that was descended in the Corlett family, now in Massachusetts. So although Mount Lebanon, kind of the capital of the Shakers, had refined furniture production, so they actually had a chair manufacturing business where it was assembly line, you know, long before Henry Ford produced the Model T. They produced all the elements and pieces in a production line, and it was very, very simple in form and devoid of ornament. So it was simple. But at North Union, the chair makers and the furniture makers they seemed to not be able to resist embellishing their work in some way. Work tables have ring turnings. They have some decorative elements that aren't necessary, strictly speaking, but that's what they did at North Union. And here is that Western Reserve Historical Society rocker. So this was a panel that was in that Shaker Makers exhibit years ago. So thanks again to the Western Reserve for permitting me to photograph their rocker to use for educational purposes. It exhibits a lot. It seems to be an earlier chair than some of the other things I have shown you, maybe 1830s, maybe even 1820s. It has a bullseye knee, which is seen on some of the other North Union pieces in the Shaker Museum's collection. And it also has the shape of the front uprights kind of are tapered before they are pegged to the rocker part. And that seems to also be characteristic of North Union, if not Ohio, rocking chairs. And it also had elements of paint to it too. Although strictly speaking, this isn't furniture, it is a wonderfully documented example of timber production at North Union. This is an oval carrier, a shaker box with 2 maple fingers that are nailed with copper nails, and the top and the bottom are pine. And it was sent from James Prescott, I think is a pretty likely candidate. I don't know how many 2 people at North Union would have had the initials JSP in this time period, but it was sent from JSP to Eldris Arabella from the First Order, so the New Lebanon, or now known as Mount Lebanon, New York. So yet again, pine appearing. This is an image from the Shaker Dreams 2010 exhibit. I did not curate this. This was done before my time, and it shows a bed from Watervliet, Ohio, on casters. So North Union, there are no examples of beds, but we know that 200, on the order of 200 Shaker brothers and sisters were at North Union. So they must have slept somewhere. So somewhere out there in the universe are at least about 200 beds that were probably produced in a similar manner to this bed, on casters, in the dormitories to facilitate cleaning. And, oops, excuse me, I didn't update the caption on the left, but basically candle stands. There are some images of candle stands in some of the early Shaker Historical Society photographs when it was at Moreland School, but none of those still seem to be in the collection. There is one candle stand in the collection, but I don't remember the source of that. So I'm not sure if it's North Union. When they collected originally, sometimes they bought shaker furniture from other communities to illustrate and fill the gaps. You know, they had no bed, so they bought a bed. So I'm not sure of the candle stand. But I do know there are no known examples, at least not known by me, of any tall chest like this that was produced at many other shaker communities. This one in particular seems to have been typical in Massachusetts. And it is very tall. I couldn't tell you how tall, but I'm 5'9", and I can't see into the top levels of drawers. These kind of chests were shared by multiple shakers. So if it was placed in the sisters' dormitory, several of the sisters would have shared it. Perhaps there's none at North Union because it was a smaller community and they didn't need to create so much storage vertically. They could do well enough with a standard size chest. That's just purely speculation, but it is an interesting thing to ponder. And what else can we ponder? What else can we think about? You know, what did celibate shakers, why did they need a high chair and a cradle, which were in the collection? Well, the examples that are in the collection were from the Russell family, who were married, who had children when they initially founded the community. They didn't stay, so ultimately they left, but that's why those two children related or baby related articles of furniture are in the collection, as opposed to those that articles that relate to the fact that they adopted people. Shaker innovation. Oh, and incidentally here at the end is the dining table, which I suspect is a reproduction for various reasons. But at the end is a Jenny Wells doll sitting in that Russell high chair. Sorry, I can't give you a better picture of that. Okay. There we go. Shakers were also known for their innovations. So other things I thought I would show you to illustrate some of their ingenuity and the fact that North Union shakers knew the technology pretty much as soon as any of the others invented things. They invented a type of lawnmower. In Maine. They invented an apple peeler, which is very, very similar in design to what you can buy at Williams-Sonoma today. And bottom right, their herbal medicines and seed packet industry was basically just simply a small brown paper envelope with a small amount of the medicine or the herbs that were being sold, or the seeds that were being sold. Because prior to that, you can only get them in large quantities. So very, very clever shakers. Brother James Prescott went up to New Lebanon, so the capital, in 1860. And so he encountered there and wrote about his visit the chair making business. They manufacture a new kind of chair, which turns on a screw pivot every which way. So on the left is an example of just such a chair, which was sold at auction in 2016. So Brother James knew about this type of chair, so it's possible he brought that concept back to North Union, but I've never seen an example of it, other than this one. But they did seem to utilize the innovation in the form of the patent for a tilter chair, which was patented March 2nd, 1852. They basically did that with a kind of a ball mechanism in the back uprights that rested on a flat piece that stays flat against the floor. So the back can tilt upon the surface of the globe. So it's just like any kind of school chair, metal chair with a plastic seat, has that basically the same design that the Shakers invented in the middle of the 19th century. So the example I show here seems to be North Union with a splint seat, ash stretchers, but was refinished at some point. So ignore the varnish that's on it currently. So where did all the furniture go? The Shaker community, founded in 1822, they built up with new members and new members and new members until the 1840s and 50s. They built new structures. They were on a growth period, and then the Civil War happened, and that kind of put an end to the development of North Union. That was the turning point where no new people sought out religions of this type, and it was a downward spiral from there. So they produced all that furniture. Where did it go? Because by 1889, all of the Shakers had left, and ultimately the property was sold. So on the left, it could have gone to Union Village because some of the Shakers went there. On the left is a work table with red varnish that was saved from Union Village when it closed and is preserved in the Harmon Museum in Lebanon, Ohio. But that doesn't really look like any of the North Union pieces I've seen. There's quite a refinement to North Union work tables, and the one on the left seems very, very primitive. So either that primitive characteristic is born out of just being produced by a different community, or potentially it could be born out of its age. Maybe it's significantly older, and thus looks different. But the one on the right does bear similarity to the North Union work table that was indeed painted in a blue paint. It has kind of an elegant swelling of the leg. The North Union example does not have a drawer. So maybe it's North Union made now at Canterbury, or maybe it was made at Canterbury. Don't know enough about what Canterbury did to be able to compare the two, but that would be really exciting to be able to figure that out. So if you can kind of compare, again, sorry for the image on the left, has that elegantly swelled leg, same kind of drop and overhang, and the difference, one of the differences between the two is the one on the left, the North Union version, has these just simple ring turnings at the top of the leg before it meets the squared part, and that's just so typical North Union based on all the other stuff. So it'd be very interesting to be able to track down other examples of the furniture that they produced. So the people left went to either Watervliet or Union Village. And the decline led to a big furniture sale in 1890. So a lot of the furniture that ended up in being preserved by the Shaker Historical Society, and presumably also by the Western Reserve Historical Society, probably came from that sale. So when 1889 happened, 1890, the Shakers either moved south and their belongings and possessions moved north on a train. There were 3 freight cars, box cars, that went up to Canterbury, New Hampshire from Cleveland. On the left, incidentally, Margaret Sware, she stitched a marvelous sampler, which is documented to North Union. It was sold in Philadelphia a couple years ago, and that matches very closely the Alvira Daly sampler that is in the Shaker Historical Society's collection. Chronology of North Union, I threw this in. We don't have time to go through all of it, but if you want to refer to it later, or those of you who may see this on Facebook or on the website at a future date, this is a pretty good basic chronology of North Union. And the chronology kind of indicates that the 1840s was that big building period of North Union. There were a lot of new structures. They even built a brick schoolhouse soon after the meeting house was done along present-day Lee Road. And that schoolhouse was well furnished with stationary seats and desks and teacher's platform on the north side. So where are all the desks and the globes and the atlases and the things that were kitted out in that school? They all went somewhere. Also, 1848, the meeting house was consecrated in 1849, and it shows this is where the peg rails were. It also shows a lone chair in front of that door on the right, but it's very difficult to see. So unfortunately, Louis Bowles did not record many of the interiors. Most of his photographs of the Shaker community was of the architecture from the outside. All that really shows from this very grainy, blown up image is that it's very likely to be a ladder back chair with a couple of side stretchers. Also produced at North Union, but descended in a family of neighbors. Sorry, let me back up to the prior one. Are 2 rockers and 2 chairs that were made for John Corlett and his wife, Catherine Radcliffe Corlett, who lived along what is now Fairmont Boulevard. And their family, you know, family legacy, family history is they did indeed purchase it from the Shakers. They're a figured maple with ash stretchers and have a very distinctive apple core finial and an interesting caning pattern. And here are the chairs as well. She said her cousins also had some, but she thinks that they have sold them at some point. But John Corlett was one of the group from the Isle of Man who settled in Warrensville Township. So these guys were the neighbors of the Shakers. Other neighbors along what's now Fairmont Boulevard, the Heckers and the Penties, the Heckers donated this log box that was made by the Shakers, which still retains a little blue paint on inside of that drawer. So the neighbors are a good source of what happened to the furniture. And of course, the 1890 auction. I wanted to show this slide also to illustrate the fact that the Shakers were self-sufficient mostly. They avoided worldly people. They tried to get on with it in a sustainable practice, to use modern terminology, in their own way. But if there were things that they could not produce themselves, they were not hesitant to purchase them. So Clymena Minor bought a bell for, I think, $130 to go along with a new meeting house to call people to service or perhaps meals. And the clock, which used to be in the meeting house, was purchased at auction and then later donated to the Shaker Museum. And it has your typical OG case, so you know it screams that it came from Waterbury, Connecticut area, somewhere around there. That's my best guess. And here you see that same clock again shown in one of the exhibits when the Historical Society did their exhibits in Moreland School. And sorry, this is a repeat of a slide. Okay, so North Union kitchen and dining. Most documented furniture to North Union dates from 1840s by early 1850s, because that's when the height of the community was. There wasn't much need to make more chairs when there weren't people to sit in them. And afterwards, there was no need to make more furniture again if no one was there to sit in them. So there was a rise in the furniture production in this period because there was a rise in the population. And a new extension that was 20 by 60 was added on to the center family house. And that accommodated a kitchen and dining room with really long dining tables. We don't know what those dining tables look like, but the image on the top right, the stereo view, shows Canterbury. So it may have been something like that. And on the left is a table from Mount Lebanon circa 1835. So it may have taken that appearance, or possibly, and do excuse my cat, or possibly a trestle table. But we know from J.P. McLean, who wrote about the Shakers, that in 1870 there were two long tables. The brethren served at the one and the sisters at the other. The ministry always was served at a separate table. So the elder and the eldresses had their own like high table, and the children had their repast after all the others had finished their meal. So the sisters and the brothers didn't eat with the kids. They came along later to be served. So the tables were allegedly large enough to seat 25 at a time. So that's either a lot of tables put together in a modular format or one really, really long table. So it would be interesting to find what the tables look like. Like this example here is kind of like a trestle version, which I do suspect, though, was a reproduction to illustrate Shaker dining with the white ware. And you can also see the Russell high chair is sitting there too. Pardon me. North Union furniture today. If we think about preserving the legacy of North Union, or preserving the legacy of the furniture that was produced, or trying to identify it or protect it in some way, learn more about the Shakers through the articles they produced, then the Shaker Historical Society is a really big part of that story. It has the largest collection of documented North Union furniture. Western Reserve Historical Society also has a very strong collection, archival collection, that is worthy of celebration. And you can learn a lot from them as well. Descendants have probably still, like Ms. Lyons in Massachusetts, still has like the correlate chairs. So there may be other descendants out there who also have furniture that we just don't know about, and responsible collectors and dealers like Willis Henry, who specializes in Shaker auctions, and of course historians and people interested in learning about the past like me and you. So if you want to join us for future programs, you can become a member of Cleveland Decorative Arts at clevelanddecorativearts.org. And we're also looking to revive our in-person programming in September. Believe me when I say the board is very excited and wants to do that as soon as we can safely host an event in person for the health and safety of our members.